Being a chartered manager means that you are a specialist in that area, and it means you've got all the skills to do the job to the best of its ability.
You are seen as a leader, a true leader who has credentials behind the great work you've already been doing.
It's enhanced my understanding, it's enhanced my skill set, it's improved my mindset.
It makes all the difference.
This session is recorded and will be available on the CMI website and YouTube channel. Join the conversation by using the live chat box for your questions and comments. We'll answer as many as we can during the Q&A.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Leading Through Change, Clarity, Communication and Collaboration digital event. My name is Aaliyah and I am an Events Delivery Coordinator at CMI. Don't forget to join the conversation by using the live chat box. Feel free to ask any questions you have for the speakers and we'll answer as many as possible during the Q&A session. I will now hand over to Sarah Spear, the Regional Stakeholder Lead at CMI East Midlands and Eastern Regional Board, to begin today's event.
Super. Thanks very much, Aaliyah. And it's great to be here and have so many people joining us online for this event. And so my co-host here, Amy, is with me as well. So she's also a chair for the CMI East Midlands and Eastern Board. So we're going to be tag teaming together to introduce our amazing host for this event and also then do some questions at the end as well. So as Aaliyah said, please do pop your questions into the chat and we'll be really happy to have a conversation with you as part of this event as well. So we thought that January was the perfect time for an event on change. A lot of us will be thinking about change in our personal and our professional lives. And we're delighted to have a real expert on change, having worked in this field as a consultant for over 20 years. So I'm delighted to introduce Catherine, who's going to pop onto screen, tell you a little bit about herself, and then launch into her presentation. Over to you, Catherine.
Hi both, good to be here. So yeah, as Sarah said, I've been doing transformation and change for 20 plus years. I'm generally an independent management consultant, specialising in finance change, but also covering digital strategy, people and OD. So today we're going to talk about leading through change and how we can turn the situation of uncertainty into progress. So I've got a few slides on the screen, which are, I'll just use as a talking point. So if there's anything on the screen that comes up in any of the slides, please stick your questions in the chat and then Amy or Sarah can address those to me in the Q&A session. I think the pack will be available to you guys after the event as well. So without further ado, we're here to talk about leading through change and the three pillars of clarity, communication and collaboration, and how those three areas are really key to turning uncertainty into progress. So current climate change is pretty much constant now. It's no longer an occasional thing or a side of the desk thing. And that can make it very difficult for managers and leaders who are either new to change or transformation. So they're now expected to be able to not only deliver change, but also lead their people through uncertainty. So in this session, what I'm not going to do is go really hard on any theories or any frameworks in particular. I'm going to kind of focus on really practical sort of leadership and management focused stuff. That's based on my sort of real world learnings and experience. So yeah, that's oh, sorry, I'm trying to control my slides. There we go, sorry, technical fault. So the next thing that's important to contextualize is why change feels so hard. So organizations generally aren't sure of capability. They are struggling generally with mixed messages. They'll be struggling with unclear priorities, or they could be struggling with too many demands at once, or competing demands. So when you've got leadership in a position where you've got these competing priorities, delivery pressure and uncertainty, leaders and managers can just feel absolutely stuck and really stretched. It's almost a perfect storm. So when you're leading through change, it's very much a context issue as opposed to a motivation issue. So seeing it in context will help to give you some idea of how you kind of cut through that noise and how you, as a leader or manager, can navigate change effectively for yourself and for your teams, and how you can maintain your own levels of motivation as well as those in your team. So the next area of focus is we'll look at why context is so important when you're leading through change. So leadership tension is essentially now inevitable. As I mentioned earlier, we've got technological change, we've got commercial change, strategies. So that tension is inevitable. There's between BAU and change. But when you manage this constructively as a leader or a manager in your team, you can allow your teams to work in new ways. It's that tension between the BAU side of things, where BAU management is about being ordered and predictable and stable, and looking at having very clear expectations, having known information, and really focusing on control, consistency, repeatability, reliability. In fact, the success factor in a BAU environment is reliable, repeatable. On the right-hand side, we've got this sort of the drive for change and transformation. And the context for that is that in change and transformation, we're frequently in this dynamic environment that's factors are moving all the time. There's an awful lot of uncertainty. We might know early next steps. We might know some parts of the puzzle, but we probably don't know all of it at once, particularly in transformation where you're looking to make paradigm shifts or seismic change. So the design can be iterative or emergent, and change is really disruptive for people. You are looking to change what you do, how you do it, what tools you do it with. So for leaders in change, you need to be able to create direction without full certainty. So that's very different to BAU. And you need to be able to pivot. So as priorities shift, as conditions shift, as risk shifts, you need to be agile and pivot. And you need to be in a position to be able to make decisions without incomplete information. So being able to be kind of comfortable operating in that grey area. The important focus in change is to have clarity and alignment, not necessarily to have consistency and full control. So in a change environment, success actually just looks like making progress. So in summary, change leadership doesn't require more effort necessarily, but it does require a very different leadership style in a change or transformation context. So when you're expected to maintain stability whilst also disrupting your current services, that can create resistance in your teams, because people are, if leaders are leading as if it's BAU as opposed to leading through change, that's where you'll get a lot of drag or noise in your organization. So recognizing that you need to, there's a context shift from BAU to change is effectively your first step to leading well through change. So we're going to talk about 3 areas. So clarity, communication, and collaboration, and how those are so important to being able to lead through change. So first of all, we'll take a look at clarity. So clarity in this context of change doesn't actually mean certainty. What it does mean is that you can make people's priorities explicit. You can make their priorities clear. It means you can clearly demonstrate or communicate the trade-offs and make them visible. So when people have got multiple priorities, a trade-off decision has to be made, and it's making sure people are aware that if I do this, I can't do this. It's also really important to give clarity on expectations. So it's not just the priorities and trade-offs, but to make sure everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing, by when, who else is doing something, whether you're going to receive an input from somebody else, whether you've got to report it to someone, because you'll have a matrix of people all working in an agile, quite a fluid context. So managing people's expectations and knowing what you've got to deliver to who is really important, so that you're not going to have an impact on other people in that sort of complicated environment. So when we talk about sort of clarity, if your teams keep asking the same questions over and over again, and you're thinking, oh, we've spoken about this, try and reframe how you think about that. Instead of thinking about, are they being resistant? Are they trying to subvert the change? And think instead that they're basically trying to sense make. So they're trying to make sense of their own work and how they prioritize their workload. So leaders, you create calm in your teams by reducing ambiguity and not by sort of over reassuring. So it's about reducing stress through providing clarity. What's changing and what isn't, why it matters now, and what people need to do differently. So that's the first element. The second element was communication. So communication during periods of intense change is not about broadcasting. It's not about sort of just sending out a message and shouting loudly. The communication during change is about people trying to really understand the impact, as opposed to just collect information for information's sake. When you are trying to build clarity, particularly in change, where you are creating a level where you're maybe changing people's priorities, introducing new concepts, new theories, maybe trying to get like a paradigm shift in your organization, repetition of the same message brings clarity. So maybe you need to repeat the same message 3, 4, 5, 6 times. You may need to think about how you communicate and having a multimodal communication system. So based on people's communication preferences, some people might prefer to have a webinar like as we are today. Some people might prefer to have a reading material that they can take away and digest. Some people might prefer to have a workshop, or where they can ask questions, or maybe like a Slack or Teams channel where they can communicate with peers. So it's ensuring that you create comms channels, multimodal comms channels, so that everybody has the ability to access and process the information, so that they can build their own mental clarity about what's happening. It's also really important to acknowledge uncertainty. So in your communications, it's okay to say, we don't know all of the answers, but we're working through them. We don't know this yet, but what we do know is this, and we will tell you this. And as we get clarity on broader areas or stuff further down the line, we will communicate that with you. So you're building trust by communicating the level of uncertainty. But if you do it calmly and consistently and keep the messaging clear, repeat the message, explain why things are changing and not just what, and listen for misunderstanding. So as a leader or a manager, do some active listening. If you're maybe having one-on-ones with your teams, or you're having sessions and you think you've communicated messages and people seem to be misunderstanding, you can have some active listening. Ask them to repeat back, for example, or ask them to confirm if they've understood. So there's lots of techniques about how you check the level of understanding achieved through your communication channels. And again, think about 3 different ways to communicate your messages. So the strategic lens, so why what we're doing really matters. The practical lens, so what changes day to day for each person that's going to be impacted. And then personally, what people can expect from you as a leader and manager through that process. So the last of the 3 areas we were going to talk about is collaboration. So when teams are under pressure, silos and entrenched ways of working, they do really strengthen, because people will cleave to their old ways of working. They will hold on tightly to stuff that they know. They will hold on tightly to their safe spots. So in a change environment, you really need to actively build in collaboration, because human nature is to resist. In the complexity of change and the level of uncertainty, it makes it different. So decision making can become much harder and slower, because there's a lack of certainty, as we talked about earlier on, because there's an element of agility and unknowns. So you can get decision making, as I said, can slow, and you end up with lots of escalations of stuff that shouldn't really be coming up to you as a leader or a manager. So stuff escalates that should have been resolved sort of within teams. So basically asking people to just collaborate more and just be better doesn't often work, because frequently people are not behaving that way on purpose, but they're trying to sense make. So you need to, as a manager and leader, design in decision rights and ownership actively. So you need to sort of remove the friction. So as a leader and manager, your job is to create the safe spaces for collaboration, remove any friction, and make ownership and decision rights really clear. So you as the leader can clarify to everybody, so that everyone's aware of who decides what, who contributes what, and who delivers what. So I said I wouldn't talk about tools and frameworks, but for example, a RACI matrix, for example, or governance charters, talking about sort of people who are on, for example, design authorities, or program structures, or working group updates, etc. So in order to create that collaboration, leaders and managers need to focus on more of creating shared outcomes, having clear handoffs between the teams. So understanding that it takes multiple people to work together, but that the handoff, who does what and when, that's really important. And as I said, just removing friction, so people feel psychologically safe to be able to be agile and to be able to pivot, and so people aren't restricted and feeling that they need to cleave to their old ways of working. So the next slide to talk about, and apologies that the slides have not rendered super well on StreamYard. The line through change isn't meant to be there, it's just a presentation issue. But change and transformation really reveals the culture of your organization and your teams much faster than any voice of the customer surveys or organizational surveys, any sort of, one-to-one team meetings, performative stuff that people say and respond to. So in change, the culture shows up more clearly in people's behaviors. So rather than what they necessarily say. So teams in these environments will really notice what leaders say and then how they follow it up. So are you delivering and behaving in a manner that creates trust? And are you behaving in a manner consistent with what you're saying? So as a manager and a leader, you need to be able to have those small, consistent behaviors and matter much more than like a single big message. So making sure you're always showing up for your team in a way that they expect. And that's sort of not to say that you have to be a certain way, but just small, consistent behavior that demonstrates that we want to collaborate, we want to communicate, and we want to give clarity. You build credibility by moment during uncertainty. So again, there's a small, repetitive, always demonstrating those behaviours. So another thing as leaders and managers, it's how you signal to your team is quite important. So people will watch you to see what you prioritise. So what behaviours you prioritise in your teams or outputs you prioritise in your teams, how you reward certain behaviours or certain outputs, and also what behaviours are tolerated. So if people are behaving in a unhelpful manner, but that behaviour is tolerated or rewarded, that's giving a very mixed message to your team. So you need to make sure you're checking that what you do, what you reward, what you tolerate is aligned to what you say you're trying to do. So we've talked about the three areas. We've talked about culture and context, and fundamentally, leading through change, we don't need to have all the answers as leaders. What we do need to be able to do is provide direction. We need to be able to have a shift in our mentality from providing certainty, which is a BAU activity, into providing direction through change. We need to be able to move away from the concept of our communication telling people about stuff to our communication being aimed at helping them to make sense of change. So it's sense making and contextualizing. And we also need to be able to move away from the sort of the control towards an intentional collaboration. So designing collaboration in your teams. So if you can adopt these behavioral changes, you are, as a leader, will be able to sort of create behaviors in yourself and your team that then turns uncertainty into momentum and delivery. So that's the end of my handful of slides. We like to bring in Sarah now to hopefully go for some questions, I think.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Catherine. That was fascinating and a really good start and a lot for people to think about. And I think both reassuring for people in that it's not about kind of this hero leadership, but also some really good things to think about in terms of that consistency of behaviour and really being aware of how you're interacting with your teams and colleagues. So you said at the start, so you've got a lot of experience in this field. So could you maybe give us a couple of examples, anonymised, obviously, we don't want you to have to name names, but maybe an example of when change didn't go so well. What were some of the pitfalls, a way for people to learn what they should avoid? And then maybe an example of some good practice in change, something that we can learn from.
Yes, so let me think about this. So pitfalls. So we've talked about communication. So where, from personal experience, where stuff has gone wrong is assuming that if you don't say anything, that keeps the noise down. But actually, a key failing or a pitfall is to not communicate anything. Even if you don't know, you're better to communicate and say, we don't know what's happening yet, but we will tell you as soon as we can. If you don't have a drumbeat of communication or a constant communication, people will fill that with their own fears, noise, interpretation. So it's so important to communicate more than you think. Make an assessment of the amount of comms you need to do and then double it.
Yeah, that's a good rule. And yes, you're right. I think the organisational rumour mills start otherwise, don't they, to fill that silence and people start having their own interpretations of what's going on. And again, I think that's reassuring that we're not saying that you have to have all the answers as a leader, but just being able to say to people that holding the space, this is what's going to, we're thinking about this, we're working on this is where we are now already. That shows that honesty and transparency. I think that's really good advice.
Yeah, and another thing, actually, just thinking about it is, and this is my personal experience, I'm not saying it works for everyone, but I've found that when you're leading through change, it's a kind of a different, as we've talked about, different leadership traits, but actually being humble, being able to be humble and saying, I don't know all the answers, but we'll work them out. Being able to be wrong and being like, well, we thought that was right, turns out something else has happened now and that's wrong. So humility is really important because you're not going to know all the answers at the start. And I've found that change is scary for lots of people, right? So, and actually being like authentic and just being honest and open and saying, like, this is difficult, it's hard, I'm struggling, you're struggling. It's okay to be human. In fact, I've found that the more human I am, the better it lands, because your people are kind of then trusting you, and if they're struggling and they see that you're not just sailing through it, it generally creates a much more authentic human connection.
Yeah, and that's what human-centered leadership is so important. We've definitely seen that move, I think, in the 21st century to seeing our leaders as human and as people like us. And as you say, it's reassuring for people in the organisation as well to actually be able to hear that it's not just them, it's everyone is grappling with these issues, and change is there for everyone. And it is unsettling. We're used to routines and we like our kind of comfort zone. So having to go outside those is unsettling for a lot of people. But yeah, remembering that is really important as part of it. And so I just wanted to think a little bit about sort of what happens after the change, because I think we sort of talk about change as like a project. There's a change project, there's a change piece in an organisation. A lot of work goes into that, a lot of communication, as you said. What happens next, or what should happen next? So how do you actually make that change stick and make sure it's successful in sort of the medium to longer term?
So there's a few things here. So first of all, it's important to, when you're designing a big change program or a big change initiative, to have some sort of metrics of success, to make sure that you are able to know when you've done enough change and done enough comms, right? So know your end state, know what you want it to look like, and then you can hold yourself accountable to that. So you're not, the change is not just dropped and, design a new system, drop it in, and there you go. How to really do so, again, creating very regular drumbeat of comms, creating a comms library, maybe a SharePoint site, I don't know, Slack channel, doing a lot of change management and making sure that people know what's changing, they know what to expect, you're holding their hands through the change, you are effectively making it easier for them to adopt the change than you are for them to just, stick to the old ways of working. So it's removing as much friction as possible from people to be able to sort of live it and breathe it. And then, it sounds obvious, but when you've got a change program and they are kind of almost owning the change, have a very clear activity that hands over into a BAU role at the end of the day, so you can have some formal sort of, well, we had a change program and we had a workstream lead or a project manager and whatever, and make sure that that's goes through a sort of robust internal handover into the BAU organisation, into a leader, into a team. And I mean, and this is sort of starting to enter into like HR and OD concepts, but actually building those into people's job roles. If you've significantly changed what happens, make sure that people's job role reflects that. Make sure that their accountabilities reflect that, and also, you know, their reward and remuneration, which I won't touch on too much, but that's how you make sure that everybody's aligned. Not only you do the poll and you create noise and excitement and demonstrate the benefit of the change, but then you also create some formal structure around, well, look, this is in your role, this is, you know, this is what you've got to do. And, you know, so it's informal and emotional, but also formal.
Yeah, great. So it's really thinking it in sort of a multifaceted approach, isn't it, to actually embed that change in the organisation. So you're looking at the systems that support it, people's job roles, like I said, the accountabilities, the reporting structures. So not thinking of anything as being a sort of a discrete project, but actually thinking the longer term, how to really embed that and remove all the things that might stop it, whether that's, again, practical things like systems, people's roles, make sure that everything is aligned to the change where you want it to be. Yeah, that's really useful. We had lots of questions being pre-submitted, so I want to bring Amy back on now so we can start taking some of the submitted questions that we had in advance, but also we're really keen to have the conversation with people that are listening live as well. So I can see some questions have been coming through. So Amy, if we take a little bit of a mixture of pre-submitted and live questions, and we'll do as many as we can in the time we've got.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sarah. And thanks, Catherine. That was brilliant, and really will have resonated with a lot of our listeners, I'm sure. So you can see the first question there from Sarah on the screen. This definitely resonates with me. How do you prevent or combat change fatigue in your teams? This is really common, isn't it, with change, either with lots of change going on at the same time or long and big change programs. What's your take on that one?
So there's lots of levers you can pull with that to prevent change fatigue. So again, we've talked loads about clarity. So just giving people clarity. So particularly, and again, I'm going to stray into another area, like, you know, people who are, for example, neurodiverse, or maybe from a different background, maybe from a different industry, who are in a new industry. So people the change will hit harder for some people. So as well as for most, you know, the change curve is very difficult for humans in general. So there's levers you can pull are you can create fun around it, you can create engagement around it. That's why comms and change management in a change function is really important, like positivity. It's a bit of marketing and promotional, sort of explain to people what they're going to get out of it, why it matters to them, what's coming that they can get excited about. When people are, I'm just trying to think, when people are have got changing priorities, and we've talked about agility and sort of, you know, uncertainty, help people know what's urgent and what's important. So they're not trying to do everything all at once, because people will be, you know, they've got a day job, they've got change to do. It's not possible to do it all. People get tired, people get run down. So allow them, create sort of ways to help them understand what they don't need to do and what they can delegate or what can be stopped. So if people are going through, if the change is over, you know, 6, 12, 18, 24 months, some big stuff can be, you can maybe agree up front to people, well, you used to do that report every week. Well, let's say during the next 6 months, you'll do it every fortnight or every month. Or these meetings that used to take place for 3 hours, now we're going to cut them down to an hour and a half, so you can have an hour and a half back. So as leaders and managers, making it clear what people's priorities are and allowing them to downshift some of the other stuff.
Brilliant, thank you. Lots of food for thought. And a question from Darren next. You've talked about communication a lot, but he's asked specifically, is there a tried and tested way to communicate change to all levels of the organisation, it can often be the way, can't it, that change will kind of land in pockets, and the communication isn't consistent across. Yeah, have you got any advice on that?
Yeah, so I guess it's what I always do is create a comms plan and a stakeholder matrix. So identify who all your stakeholders are. So maybe you've got a board who will require it in words of one syllable, and they need to be able to interpret the information in 30 seconds or less because they're very, very busy strategic people. You might have program teams that want a bit more technical detail because they need to know, for example, a system or a regulation that's changing, or legislation, or manufacturing, whatever. And then you might have people who are in your organization who are, I don't know, the ones that are operating the processes and sort of, I don't know, processing invoices or producing quotes. So if you can segment your stakeholders at the various different levels, and then you have a kind of golden thread of what you're trying to communicate, and that golden thread should be the same through those 3 or 4 whatever levels, but you need to pitch it at the right level. So as I said, a board might want, what's this mean for our strategy? What's this mean for our results? They need to be able to know it in 30 seconds. And you get right down to people who are doing all the way through management, middle management, and then even early starters, or people who are doing a very sort of process heavy job. They're going to want to basically know, what's it going to change to my process? How am I going to log in? So yeah, stratify your stakeholders, and then also think about channels. So all levels of the organization. Some people will prefer, like we've said, some people prefer webinar, some people will prefer training, some people will prefer to read stuff. So think about people's learning style, communication styles, and their attention window. So you kind of create a communication matrix. I hope I've answered that clearly.
That's great. Yeah, thank you. And we've got a question from Abby up next. And you've talked about this a bit, but this is obviously operating in an imperfect world, which often we are with change. How can we bolster staff through times of change when management above us is not necessarily being constructive, or there are tensions there? How would you tackle that kind of scenario?
So I'm going to assume that Abby's asking this question from a perspective that maybe I'm going to make an assumption that maybe your organizational change capability or your leadership's not behaving in the ways that we've talked about, and so therefore how can you informally help your team or your co-workers to make sense? So again, there's quite a few levers. What the key thing here, I think, is, again, we've talked about being human and being honest with people about how they're feeling. Create space in your team meetings. For example, maybe you're not the one delivering the change, but it's being delivered to you and you're all frustrated and you don't know what's coming. So create space in your team meetings to say, how do we feel about this? What can we do? You know, create open spaces so people can communicate and share their concerns. Now, you might not be able to influence it, but what you can do is demonstrate to people it's okay that we don't know, surface some frustration, some tension. What you could do if you're in that kind of situation is maybe look for some partner teams in other parts of the organization. So let's say you're in HR going through a transformation program, you might want to go and speak to contemporaries in finance who might have been through it and said, oh, how did you guys deal with this? What do we do? So it's creating some informal networks, some informal support, and then in your teams, giving people space to vent or be not okay, or even, actually, I'm just thinking off the hoof, in your teams, think about ways you could provide like little solutions to it, like, you know, allow people to suggest, well, we know this is difficult, what can we do better as a team to minimize the impact on us or maximize our ability to cope.
Brilliant, thank you. We'll take just one more pre-submitted question because we've got so much engagement from the live feed, so I want to take some live questions as well. So we'll just take this last question from another Sarah. How can you maintain engagement during change with people who are really busy and who have got a variety of different needs? And I know you've touched on this, but if you could expand on that one, that would be great.
Yeah, so I think I kind of mentioned this earlier, and again, I said I wouldn't go too heavy on frameworks, but there's something called an Eisenhower matrix, which enables you to kind of categorize what's urgent and important versus stuff that's not urgent and not important. So yeah, when people have got massive amounts of conflicting priorities, helping them to understand what is there, you know, you've got a priority list of 25 things. Well, no, let's cut that down. Let's say actually those 3 things, if all you do today are those 3 things, you've succeeded today, and allow them to you know, push down the line the other stuff. It also goes back to making sure you're providing with enough information at the level they require. So again, don't be, if you're pushing out shed loads of information but you know people are busy, maybe you need to tailor your comms and go, do you know what, I'm going to do a 30-second drum beat. I'm going to have 1 slide with 6 bullet points. Short, sharp, really clear, not waffly, making sure that it's in a language that people understand. So there's a couple of techniques there that you could use to sort of reduce, you know, overload.
Brilliant, some really practical tips, which is what we all need. That's great, thank you. So I'll move to some of the live questions now. We've, like I say, we've had loads of engagement, which is brilliant. So I think you've covered off part of this already. We just talked about change fatigue, but any tips on ensuring change for real purpose and not just for the sake of change? Does that go back to your case for change at the very outset? What's your view on that one?
Yeah, 100%. It's case for change. It's business case. So whatever you call it, you know, business case could be a financial, if it's about saving costs or generating more revenue. Case for change, there might be, you know, you can have quantifiable and unquantifiable benefits. Some of it's going to be hard, fast numbers, you know, more revenue, less cost, I don't know. Some of it will be making people's work lives better. Some of it will be making people, enabling us to be more agile. Some of it will be protecting our brand reputation, for example. So any change that is delivered should be prioritized back to what is your strategy. If we're talking about entity level change, go back to your corporate strategy. Everything we're doing should serve delivery of the corporate strategy. If it doesn't, why are we doing it? At a functional level in finance and HR and IT, does this project, does it make the boat go faster? does it make the car go faster? If it doesn't, question why we're doing it. So always tie everything back to benefits case. And there's also nothing wrong. In fact, it's good project management behavior by going, well, we thought this was good, we thought this was the right thing. Emergent information is now showing us actually this is not the right thing to do. So sometimes the right thing to do is stop and pivot. That's not always easy to do, but that's, yeah, sometimes the right thing.
Really interesting, thank you. And picking up on the discussion around communication, this is an interesting one. Are there any keywords that you would use or not use when you're discussing change? Just from your own personal experience, I guess it depends on the type of change. But yeah, just any thoughts on that one?
It's so contextual, but you know, language is obviously really important. So it depends. So for this, and because I'm a consultant and I work in multiple different industries and multiple different clients, it's important that you are contextual to your organizational culture. So if you're in an organization that really respects, you know, academic theories and principles, that's the kind of, and that gives you credibility, you would play on that. If you're in an organization that's very focused on people and feeling and culture, you would use language that reflects that. If you're in a, you know, organization that's a bit command and control, and your job is to cut through and get stuff done, you might need to use that kind of language. Not my personal favorite, but and again, keywords, I'd keep it simple. And obviously you have dropped in some jargon here, but that's because we're trying to canter through stuff. But when you're communicating with people, don't assume people understand what you're talking about. Now that when you're a change person, it can be very easy that you just assume everyone understands what a change impact assessment is, or a comms plan is, or a stakeholder analysis, or an ERP, or a blah, blah, blah. So don't make those assumptions without stating them, and keep your language as far as possible really simple and plain English. And where you've got complex jargon, I create a data dictionary or a glossary so that over time you can start to use words like ERP and KPI, but you've got a glossary somewhere so people can refer to them, a bit like you would with a, I don't know, in a book, in a reference, or a dictionary or something.
That's a great tip. Thank you. The next viewer has submitted a number of questions, so I'm going to jump to question 3, which is about collaboration, which you've talked about, and it's often promoted during change, as you've said, but it can slow down decisions. So when do you think leaders should prioritise speed over inclusion, and how should they explain that choice?
Again, that's very context driven. So if you are delivering change where you've got external dependencies that you can't control but must hit. So let's say, for example, let's talk finance, and you are looking at the UK Combined Code Provision 29, where CFOs and COOs have to comply or explain about their internal control framework. So you know that you've got to deliver something by a certain point in time. It might, if you work in banking and finance, there may be sort of, I don't know, regulations around that you have to, there's been things like Payment Services Directive and treating customers fairly. If you've got external regulation, you need to prioritize speed over inclusion, but you can make that very through your governance frameworks and clarifying people's roles and responsibilities, and explain why you are doing that. So if everybody knows the decision is made at this forum and it is these people, and here is why, because we've got 6 months to do this big thing. And then you can allow people to have their discussions and the debates outside it, and make sure that at that decision forum that happens once a week, the people are representing the key messages from their teams at that decision forum. So there's a few like practical tips to how you, and again, the flip side, if you are trying to deliver change that creates cultural change, well, then you're maybe not focusing on speed. You want to do it right, and you want to do it in a way that takes everybody with you. So it's contextual.
Brilliant, thank you. The next one I think is something that a number of us can identify with. How do you hold the line as a leader and not be kind of stampeded or drummed out? You might get a curveball or a series of things not going to plan during your change initiative. How do you hold that line?
So I think we've talked, I mentioned this earlier, but if you go back to thinking that as a leader through change, you're not expected to have all the answers. So if you set yourself out as having all the answers right from day one and being a command control leader, in some organizations, maybe in sort of certain organizations, you have to have that, but generally in commerce and industry, holding yourself out as somebody who knows all the answers, particularly with the level of disruption we've got at the moment, you're not setting yourself up for success. So the way to navigate that is to say, I don't know all the answers, or we know half the answers, which we've already talked about, and being able to say that went wrong, we thought it was right, but based on all of this information we had, now more information's come about, so we now know we've got better information. What we'd originally decided to do is no longer fit for purpose. So that.
Thank you. And we've probably got time for one more. So you have touched on this around communication, but is there anything in particular that you can think of around the cultural background of a team that might affect how management should communicate with them a possible change? Presumably that goes back to context again, the cultural background of the team, where they might be based in the world, and what your relationship is like with that team. Yeah,
and again, I don't want to stray into too many formal principle models, but there's Hofstede's cultural dimensions, which can allow you to see how different cultures are in terms of, I don't know, formality or compliance. Those sort of, some organizations are very formal, some cultures are formal, some cultures are informal, all that sort of stuff. I won't go into it, but that's something to look at. But there's also language. So if you are doing change across a global organization and you've got multiple different BUs or entities, your language needs to be clear. Maybe you translate your material, maybe you don't. If you're not translating it from the the source language, make sure you're not using complex jargon. Make sure you're keeping your sort of sentence structure, your grammar straightforward and simple. You should be aware of, and again, I don't want to sort of, you should be aware of if you're looking at different cultural backgrounds, or that there are, be sensitive to things like let's say different sort of holiday calendars, different celebration calendars where people might be observing certain things that others aren't. If people are, different people are working certain hours or not working certain hours, so just being really sensitive out of work, or sort of maybe like non-working context, and then that will give you an idea of where people are maybe at in terms of when you're communicating with them.
That's great. Thank you, Catherine. Well, we've put you through your paces. So thank you for responding to all of those. And thank you again to the audience for the engagement that we've had. That's been brilliant. And back to you, Sarah.
Super. No, that was really fascinating, and apologies we can't get through all the questions, but as I say, we want to keep us to our time slot, so hopefully there's enough in there for people who had a few questions on those different topics. Catherine, we always ask people to do final takeaways from these events because there's so much information, so we want to just have a snapshot of some of the key things. So I think you've got a slide for us on what your key takeaways are from this, so over to you again.
Super. I'll just get the slides popped up. So key takeaways. So how do we lead through change effectively? So first of all, it's create clarity. So be really explicit about what is and isn't changing. Set a couple of priorities about what people should do, what matters now, and define what good looks like for this week, this month, this time box. Communicate for sense making, not for broadcasting. So explain the why, not just the what. Repeat your messages consistently and listen for misunderstanding, and don't assume that people are resisting on purpose as opposed to misunderstanding. And then finally, you need to design collaboration in. Make it clear who decides, who contributes, who delivers. Align your teams around shared outcomes and remove any friction across the boundaries. Ta-da!
That's great. Thank you so much, Catherine. And there's so much here as well for it. So I think that's really useful. And I can see all the thanks coming through on the chat as well from people. So we've just got a couple of minutes left at the moment. So I just wanted to ask you, is there going to be any change, do you think, with AI and things coming through now? Are we likely to see change processes in organisations be affected by that? And what do you see the future looks like for your role and sort of people working in change?
So again, off my personal feeling and how I've sort of experienced it is there's been a lot of noise around AI and a lot of noise around what it can and can't do. Lots of bodies are there's emergent governance around AI and about its limitations and about how you use it. I think what it will do for change is I actually think it's going to really drive more focus on the human element. So it's much easier to create a framework now using AI. You can create comms packs, etc. There's all, you can access all of these, an MBA's level of, change frameworks at the, it's straight into ChatGPT, but it will become about how you deliver it. And so it will be about how you use AI effectively. So you're creating stuff that doesn't read like it's AI slop. And it will be about how you, as the leaders, it will just double down on the need for the human element, I think, because creating packs and materials, that's sped up infinitely. It's about how you connect to humans and making sure people buy into it. So,
yeah,
personal opinion.
That's great. Yeah, even my 8-year-old refers to AI slop now, so it's yeah, definitely being recognised for its limitations. So, and I think that's good to know as managers and leaders, that actually our role and that human element is going to be more important in the future as we see sort of more AI coming through in some of these channels. But actually it's that the personal involvement and what we can bring to those roles is what makes a difference for people in their working lives as well, and how they cope with difficult situations like going through change. So thank you so much, Catherine, and Amy for co-hosting as well, and to all of you who've submitted questions both before and afterwards. So I'm going to hand back to Aaliyah to see us out now, please.
That's it for today's session. Thank you to Sarah, Amy, and Catherine for your insight and expertise. Stay tuned to hear more about CMI membership, and thank you for joining us today.
Don't forget, as a CMI member, you can find the latest management and leadership insights at managers.org.uk. If you're not yet a member, join our community to discover CMI Confidence with on-demand resources, our network of mentors, and industry-leading accreditations.